Hello, welcome. I am so delighted that you are here today for this release event of Opportunity to Learn, Responsibility to Lead. I'm Ross Weiner. I'm Executive Director of the Education and Society Program and a Vice President at the Aspen Institute. And for today's webinar, we're going to hear in just a minute from three dynamic policy leaders from very different parts of the country, very different political contexts. We'll hear from Linda Darling-Hammond, President of the State Board of Education for the state of California. Then we'll hear from Amy Sinclair, the Majority Whip and the Senate Education Chair for the Iowa State Senate. And then we will hear from Angelica Infante-Green, State Commissioner of Education for the state of Rhode Island. Thank you to each of you for joining us today. I'm really excited to hear your remarks. I'm going to spend, before that, just a few minutes setting a little context for our conversation today. So at the Aspen Institute, we've been grappling with many of the same realities that you all have been in terms of the current state of public education, right? Declines in student achievement in the last 2 years, but those declines compound stagnating and even slightly declining achievement really for the last decade. A mental health crisis among our young people. Since COVID, 70% of schools report an increase in the percentage of students seeking mental health services. And we know from other sources, really epidemic levels of anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts among young people. Culture wars that are manifesting in schools as book bans and speech codes that are having a chilling effect on teachers' ability to address sensitive issues, a beleaguered education workforce, plummeting public confidence in our schools, and even polarizing politics in the broader society, right? So 64% of Americans believe that democracy is in crisis in 2022, and those concerns run across party lines. And then finally, the lack of a policy framework within public education that holds together a broad bipartisan coalition, as has been the case really for the last 40 years since A Nation at Risk ushered in the era of standards-based accountability policies. So we recognize, though, that specifically over these last 2 years, our schools and students have experienced unprecedented disruptions, right? Widespread school closings that undermined academic learning, but also put a spotlight on the role that schools play in ensuring access to food, access to mental health, healthcare more generally, and other supports. And overnight, we saw schools as responsible for ensuring every student had access to technology, access to broadband internet, just have access to school. So these closures also gave parents new sightlines into the day-to-day experiences of teachers and students. And then on top of all of this, we've had a national reckoning with systemic racism that brought renewed attention to serving students from marginalized backgrounds, but also led to criticism of overreach in some places that has fueled an equally or even more powerful backlash. And then a historic infusion of federal funding that's created a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for investing in opportunity. So all of this together creates a watershed moment in understanding the central role of schools and creates an urgent context for recommitting to the opportunity mission of public education. So in that moment, Aspen and this working group that you'll hear from came together believing there was an opportunity to refresh the education agenda, to advance a richer vision for public education, and really to rebuild our muscles for bipartisan coalition building within public education. So to start this group, we, sorry, I'm trying to turn up the volume. We convened a bipartisan group of state policymakers. You see the states that they represented in the document you will have access to today. You'll see specifically who all of they are, but this is a group of policymakers who are diverse in their official roles, in their political affiliation, geography and region, their race and ethnicity. We really wanted to make sure we had a diverse group. They came together, they started their work by reflecting on values and the visions they hold for public education. They looked at research together, they spoke with experts, and after 8 months of meeting together, the group produced Opportunity to Learn, Responsibility to Lead, a set of 9 principles that all of our working group participants agreed to, and for refining a positive agenda for public education. So these principles address the student experience, the learning conditions that schools are responsible for, and the unique role of state leadership in making these opportunities real. So if you'll go to the next slide, right, principles 1 through 3 directly address the student experience and address what we know students and parents want from a public education. They want their children graduating from high school having had opportunities to develop their character and their talents and their individual needs met, with a focus on preparing them for the future of work and to fully participate in American democracy. Principles 4 through 6 address the important enabling conditions that are critical for successful student learning and development, right? The recognition that students deserve a safe and healthy learning environment that's led and staffed by caring adults with the expertise to provide learning opportunities that properly challenge students and are aligned to state standards and the skills that those young people are going to need in the future. And then finally, principles 7 through 9 explicitly address the role and responsibility for state leadership in providing opportunities to learn for all young people. So we need the right policy context and enabling conditions for these opportunities to be realized. And that includes developing partnerships with other service providers and other agencies to address the full needs of students, but not to make sure that they all fall on the shoulders of schools. And then finally, to strategically collect and utilize data to adequately inform if and how these opportunities to learn are actually available. So these principles reflect an opportunity agenda that's reflective of the aspirations and the expectations of parents and students. And the good news is that healthier and richer experiences in school lead to better student outcomes on tests and in life. Now, through an OTL lens, opportunity to learn, we're able to undergird improvement strategies with a compelling why, addressing the individual and societal needs for students to be ready for their aspirations and for the demands of society outside of school. It also gives us a framework to examine the full spectrum of learning opportunities that students deserve, from clean water and clean air in every building, to rigorous curriculum, to the availability of services that address mental health and additional needs students are facing. And we know right now that not every student has access to those fundamental opportunities, and that is not good enough for American public education to meet its mission. So it is so important for state leaders to name these opportunities and then to see where there's gaps in these opportunities and to address those gaps. Last two things, and then I'll turn it over to our speakers. The principles don't create an either-or paradigm where reading and math are prioritized over a quality facility or where science is prioritized over citizenship. Rather, it's a framework to elevate all the conditions necessary for students to receive a high-quality education. We need to be more clear about the opportunity we expect and need public schools to provide as a complement to and a pathway to realizing the reading and math achievement goals we've set, and because these opportunities are important in their own right. Opportunity, last thing is opportunity is a unifying agenda. This group of bipartisan policymakers came together across lines of difference to agree on what students deserve and what states should be working towards in public education. This opportunity to learn, responsibility to lead framework that we're releasing today may be a small proof point in our quest to have working relationships across party lines, but it is proof that we can do it and we need to do it. Public education historically has been a real source of bipartisan leadership, and we need to recenter because that is what most Americans want and expect. Finally, these principles, these are principles. They aren't prescriptions. We know every state will need to craft their own policies given the opportunities and constraints within their context. But it's important to start with this vision. And I'm incredibly grateful to the policymakers that came together to do this. And now let me turn to them. So first, we're going to hear from Linda Darling-Hammond, President of the California State Board of Education. Linda, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ross. This is such an important time in education. All of us are so keenly aware of the needs of our students, including the inequalities in access to a wide range of home and school resources, which, as you mentioned, Ross, include everything from digital devices to food, housing, and school supports. We also are so aware of the need for a whole child approach and the needs of our system for a change and transformation. the school designs that we adopted 100 years ago when the modern public school was created for compulsory education, for mass education. We were moving from the one-room rural schoolhouse to the large urban systems that were being developed. But they were modeled explicitly on the factory model that Henry Ford had just created for assembly lines for cars. And they were not designed for relationships, for personalization, for deeper learning, or for equity, because there was a very strong impulse in the eugenicist commentary of the time for dividing students into tracks and conveyor belts that would lead them to very different curriculum and futures. So the challenges of those designs have been really a bit obvious during the pandemic. And many of us are in the process of seeking to redesign. I am involved with the state board in California. We have 62% of our students who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. We have the largest number of English learners in the nation, also the largest number of homeless students. It's the 5th largest economy in the world. We've been making enormous investments in education the last few years, more than 30% increase in the amount of money going to education. But our question has to be, how should we be making these investments? How do we address the needs that are there? How do we ensure opportunities to learn? And so this set of principles could not come at a better time. We have actually been redefining our own accountability and continuous improvement system. We've just taken up a year-long process to do that. We're aware that this is going to be a critical part of our progress moving forward. We're also aware that the U.S. Department of Education recently issued guidance in February encouraging states to expand their systems of accountability indicators and to use these to guide investments in continuous improvement. The department signaled that it was eager to approve ambitious approaches where states want to take them up. So we're doing just that in California. As I said, we're diving in to strengthen our multiple measures dashboard that guides decisions about school supports and annual local conversations about improvement strategies. We have something called the Local Control Accountability Program, and in local communities, the indicators that are part of the dashboard that signal how we're making progress on our state priorities are the grist for those conversations. They drive the ways that communities allocate funding and programming and decide how to move the needle on greater opportunity and greater equity. So we're going to use the principles, and I'm just going to say a word about one sentence about each principle, about how those appear in our work in California. The first one, that all students deserve the opportunity to develop their character, talents, and interests while receiving support to address individual needs, speaks to all of the investments that we're currently making in personalized learning, learning acceleration, through expanded learning time, through tutoring and small group work. We have some new professional development centers to guide acceleration of learning and train teachers and paraprofessionals in the kinds of strategies that have been found effective. New templates for our individualized education plans for students with disabilities that are intended to help us see what's working, what's not working, where we need to personalize further. And that will be a very important part of our efforts to achieve Principle 1. Principle 2 talks about how all students deserve opportunities that prepare them to succeed in the future of work. We have a college and career ready index as part of our dashboard. And we are right now looking at what are the indicators that are going to continue to be and then be added to that indicator. How do they reflect the future of work? How do we incentivize schools and districts to ensure that every student gets access to pathways that provide that opportunity for success in the future of work? The third principle, that all students deserve opportunities that prepare them to fully participate in American democracy, speaks to the work that we're doing. We have a seal of civic engagement that we are just returning to after the pandemic, to try to identify the criteria that will allow those projects and activities, the civic engagement activities, to become part of what will become our college career and civic engagement index. And we're going to bring that into the dashboard, but we need to figure out all of the ways in which to do that. Each of these is a basket of work that the principal helps us think about. The fourth one, all students deserve safe and healthy environments that are conducive to academic learning, speaks to the work that we feel we need to do around climate surveys of schools to see what kind of environment students are engaged in, and to give schools a tool to continuously look at how to improve that climate, not only overall, but for individual groups of students. The fifth principle, that all students deserve access to caring adults with expertise in creating quality learning environments and experiences, speaks to how we make investments in our educator workforce. We have brand new indicators of teacher qualifications, which we're not just now trying to figure out how to incorporate into the accountability and reporting and continuous improvement system. What kinds of teachers do different kinds of students get access to, and then we'll have to decide how to upgrade teacher and leader preparation to meet the goals of that principle. The sixth principle, all students deserve instruction and tasks that are worthy of their effort. I love that. Aligned to state standards relevant to the skills they will need to succeed in life, speaks to the ways in which we're updating our curriculum, including right now in the STEM fields and in literacy, examining our assessments to be sure that they provide tasks worth teaching to, that then give students tasks worth learning. And then principle 7, establishing an essential policy context and enabling conditions regarding all students' opportunities to learn, is really this entire agenda. How we will expand our opportunity to learn data and guide the conversations that we need to have with the public, with the legislature, with the governor's office. Principle 8, schools and public education systems need partnerships with other public agencies and service providers to adequately address student needs, opportunities, and outcomes, speaks to the work that we're just launching for community schools with investments that we hope will reach all of our high poverty schools, in which more than 80% of students live in poverty, and an enormous undertaking to figure out how to build those partnerships and then how to track the progress that those schools and students are making and how to continuously improve those supports. And finally, principle 9 is really about the work that we want to do to strategically use data to illuminate the extent to which all schools are providing students opportunities to learn. And that's what this conversation is all about. It's what the work is all about. I'm grateful to work with colleagues from across the country. I've learned so much in this process and expect to learn more on how to tackle this really important agenda. Thank you.
Linda, thank you so much for those remarks and for your leadership in this work and for the field. Now we're going to hear from a majority whip from the Iowa State Senate and the chair of the Iowa State Senate's Education Committee, Amy Sinclair. Amy, thank you.
Good afternoon, Ross, and everyone that has joined us to hear about this pretty monumental task we've undertaken. I do want to thank the Aspen Institute and Ross specifically for convening this and for engaging such a broad variety of individuals to participate in the conversation. I think it's so important that, and I think you all will see that as I share my remarks and juxtapose those to the information you've just heard from Linda. The people involved in this conversation couldn't look more different when you put them all into a room together. We did not share political ideology. We did not share geography. We did not share family structure. we were very, very different in our makeup, and yet the important thing to note is that every single person, there was a shared desire for universal student success. And so while we're coming at this from different places, and while we wholeheartedly believe in the different track we take to get there, we all do agree with the conversation that all students deserve a shared opportunity to reach their goals. And so when I talk to you about all of the conversations, I'm coming at this from a legislative perspective, where Linda's coming at this from a more executive implementation level perspective. And both of those are important, but it does change how we came at creating opportunities to learn. And I just, from my perspective, I want to share the fact that there are different roles and responsibilities for each of those, and just Linda focused really closely on each of the individual principles. And for me as a legislator, particularly a legislator in leadership, it mattered that we were focusing on the right things, as well as the individual details of it, but that more holistic, overarching approach to making sure students are succeeding. And so for me, it was important, and we have it set up in buckets, if you will. Linda focused on all 9 of the principles, but for me, there are 3 overarching areas where we considered, and the first is the fact that we took student needs and put them at the forefront of our mind when we're having these conversations. And we know that students need to from their public education system, or from their education in general, whether that's public or non-public, or a homeschool or a micro school or a pod, we know that students need the same opportunities wherever they're receiving their education, but we want students, and we believed that students as a whole, regardless of our background, had the right, if you will. And I think for all 50 states, it's a constitutional right. We have public education written into our constitutions. They have the right to have the opportunity to become civically engaged and prepared students. They have the right to have an education that supports them in their mental and physical well-being, in that healthy and safe environment. And finally, they have the right to be trained and prepared to become willing and able contributing members of an adult society. And we started with that focus on the students, and you heard Linda talk specifically about those 3 roles in that, the pillars in our opportunities to learn focused on students. And then we stepped it up and we said, so students have the right to this, the constitutional expectation that they might receive this education. So then who's responsible for it? And we know fully that there are 2 groups of folks responsible for that, and that's the school and that's the state. And so we outlined the roles and responsibilities of both of those, under the overarching understanding that parents and students ought to be at the forefront of this conversation. And so schools are obligated, and you'll see that if you're reading through the Opportunity to Learn framework, schools are responsible for creating a safe environment for students where they can develop their own skills and abilities under the guidance of prepared and equipped adults who care about their success. And ultimately, then the responsibility for public education does, as we've seen constitutionally, fall to each of the individual states to make that happen. The state is responsible for setting up a framework for success for students. The state is responsible for creating partnerships that allow for all of those needs of students to be met, though not necessarily by the one agency of the school. And the state is responsible for collecting data and analyzing it so that we know that we've got the right opportunities in place. I think one of the biggest barriers we have to talk about is that there's a system that doesn't necessarily connect as it should. And so as a state leader, it's important to me that I find ways to connect the education of the child with all of those other pieces that undergird and support their ultimate success as adults, whether that's our departments of human services, or whether that's the local clinics, or whether that's partnering with groups that support and encourage parental engagement and involvement and just mesh all of those together. And we currently don't have a system that does that. So part of the role as a legislator is that we need to find a way to mesh those systems so that our states and our schools and our students are finding a way to connect. And when we look at that, and when we analyze the data of all of those things, as we've created in this vision of the opportunity to learn, the framework, having the data available so that we can see if what we're doing has actually accomplished the goals that we set out. And frankly, if it isn't, then we need to re-envision what it is, the opportunity that we're creating. Do we have the right opportunities? And I guess just to wrap it up here, as I hand this off to yet another incredible human being who participated in this conversation, I think we need to make sure we understand that as a society, we may have dropped the ball through COVID. That as a state, we didn't meet all of the needs of students, and as schools, we failed in meeting the trust of parents and families in educating their child. And we need to understand that we are at a point, it's a flashpoint, if you will, where we can, whether we're Republican or Democrat, whether we're white or black, whether we're male or female, we need to step up and understand that we're at a flashpoint in our ability to modernize and transform a system to meet the needs of kids and families where they are. I really appreciate, again, the opportunity to be a part of this, and I appreciate the Aspen Institute for hosting and facilitating a conversation that's led us to the release of these principles that will hopefully guide education for students today and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sinclair. And now I'm going to turn to the Rhode Island Commissioner of Education, Angelica Infante Green. Thank you, Commissioner Infante Green.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. So in my role, I'm going to talk to you from the state's perspective and really how you implement and align the OTL principles. Because I think you heard part of our process. We all come from different regions. We have different responsibilities. And it was hard. It was 8 months of going back and forth, trying to get in agreement to what really should happen in education, especially in a time where we're so divided as a nation. And some of the things that, that we talked about, at the end of each session, we said, okay, yeah, we all agree on that. Yes, we all agree on this. So it was a process. And what we've come up with these principles. Then there's the piece of how do you really, really turn this around into your community? What are the phases? How do you actually implement? Because implementation is one of the hardest things to do. So I'll tell you a little bit about how Rhode Island has been looking at the OTL principles, because we were lucky enough to help build them and have a preview to them. But if we start looking at and I'm going to jump around. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but some that are really important for us, like principle number 3, all students deserve opportunity to prepare to fully participate in American democracy. That sounds really big, but how does that happen in a school building? And we've started a civics task force. So I should rewind. We were sued because we were not teaching civics in our school. We won the lawsuit. But that meant that for us as state representatives and educators, how do we really take and really understand that what the community was asking for is to have civics taught in schools? So we created a civics task force that included the plaintiffs, that include social studies, history teachers, communities, leaders, students, educators, because that's important for us to be able to be at the table so that we can hear all sides of it. It can't just be, education can't be from just one lens, but having that deep conversation. And we will have standards and hopefully a seal as well, as California does. So that's really important, something that we've taken on really strongly here in Rhode Island. And then principle 2, prepare and succeed for the future of work. So we have something called Prepare RI in Rhode Island, where we're really looking at how we prepare our students, not just to be college ready, but also career ready. And we have, CTE is part of our indicator for our 5 stars. So we rate on accountability and a 5-star metrics. And CTE is part of that. because we value it just as much as we value going into schools. And we are revamping our secondary regs to ensure that all students have access to CTE programs and that they go hand in hand with preparing them also for college so that they can be ready to embark on the world of work. So it's not one or the other, but both. And I think that that is new for us as we push that agenda forward. But we realized that it is something that we were missing in our repertoire of what we were doing for our state diploma. So that for us is really important. And if I go into Principle 5, all students deserve access to caring adults with expertise in creating quality learning environments and experiences. So we have something in Rhode Island called SurveyWorks, and we survey parents, educators, students anonymously on what is the culture and climate in the schools? What do we need to improve upon? What are the areas that we need to work on? And then we have that data go back into the school so that we can work on what are the things that we're hearing that may not be reaching the audience that we want. So that is really important for us. We collect this data annually and we try to compare how we move up and down and how we as a state agency help the districts actually change the climate and culture. The other piece that is really important for us is number 2, again, we have law about high quality curriculum that's standards based. And what we do is that we bring all the districts together to select from 5 different curriculums that are green curriculums that are standards already based. I said that, sorry. But that really that they're looking at their community. Which one of these curricula really represent the work that we want to do and why? So it's a whole year process in selecting the curriculum with a whole team approach, making sure that we are meeting the needs of the students, the individualization that needs to happen through the curriculum, that it is high quality curriculum, that that the Rhode Island diploma means something, that we have mastered X number of things. And then looking at the interim assessments that go along with them that have to be different than what we've had in the past. And that's something that we're exploring now is how do students demonstrate what they know, what they learn in order to reach these principles. But to take a step back. So as a state, we have a strategic framework that we follow for our state agency. And what we did is that we took the OTL principles and we embedded them into our strategic plan. And how does each one fit in? How does it overlay to the work that we're already doing? And for us, as we look at all of these, and it may not be the same thing in different places, but we looked at diversity, the importance of diversity, DEI work that we're doing, a tool that we're utilizing that is used in our agency at the state level to really look at all the work and policy that we're putting forth. I think in this journey, one of the most powerful things that Ross kept saying is that it is our responsibility at the state level to guarantee a high quality education. And I think that we all understood that, but I think that when we kept talking about it, said, yeah, whose responsibility is it? Even though we have local control, it is ours. Under the OTL principles, everything that we're doing should fall under that. And I think that we have been pretty lucky to be able to align, to be able to kick off this new school year where the principles lie in the work that we're all currently doing. So I can talk a little bit more about our metrics, because that's really important for us, because part of what that is the climate of the school as well. So we measure that as a whole. And you can't get a 5-star in Rhode Island if you're not meeting the needs of our differently abled students and our multilingual learners, which are everywhere in the United States and have to have more of an individualized curriculum, not so much the curriculum, but how the scaffolds and the supports that they have in place. So a lot of this is really unpacking it. And for us, these principles are core to what we're doing, and they really symbolize a kickoff for us as we move forward. Sorry, my lights go out, part of a state agency if I don't move. So that's basically what we're doing in Rhode Island, is really taking the principles, putting it into our framework, and then the reports that all of our districts have to create for ESSA on how we're going to improve instruction across the state. This is a different time for us. It's a new opportunity that we have. And we have agreed that these are the things that we as a community value, think are important, and this is how we're going to carry them out. And then the districts write in their plans how they're going to carry out these principles within their existing plans. I think that was my cue.
Angelica, thank you so much for your leadership on this and for those examples. And I just want to reinforce the different ways that these different leaders are talking to and speaking to how they're going to use the opportunity to learn principles going forward, right? So state leadership can show up in lots of different ways. You've heard about sponsoring broad community conversations. You've heard about using them to sort of audit current opportunities or even design principles for important bodies of work. So I want to let folks know in just a minute, we're going to open it up for Q&A. So please do add your questions either to the Q&A function or to the chat, and we're going to turn to those soon. But we're lucky enough to be joined by another one of the policymaker working group members who helped to develop these principles. And so Byron Ernst, he is a member of the Indiana State Board of Education and a veteran career and technical education educator. And Byron, thank you for joining and for your leadership. So let me turn to you quickly, and then we'll go to Q&A.
Thanks, Ross. I appreciate being with the group here for the release. And I think, just to reiterate one thing, the genius of this whole process with opportunity to learn, responsibility to lead work is that it was a framework of principles that we were working toward. Again, not things, but a principle and set of principles and a framework. And I think that's important to remember as we work through this. And I think that's the genius and the great part of this. And now for us in Indiana, the work begins, right? Now, just like the others that have spoke, we've got a lot of great things going on. But I am hoping that this acts as a catalyst for us in our state to really take a look at what we're doing. How do we really fully personalize education for our young scholars? And so for me, one of the things that we've already done, I have requested that we have a state board work session around this. So we're trying to figure out what that looks like to get scheduled to both affirm what alignment already exists in what we're doing, and also look at the things that are important to us that we need to be doing and how those align with this guiding set of principles as well. You know, for example, we're really working hard on things like career counseling, and that becomes a real important part of this whole document. So therefore, how do we use the principles and the framework from a career how we set up career counseling and how we set up work-based learning? And then one of my favorite sentences as a CTE person in the whole document is where it says states can play an important role in aligning career and technical education and work-based learning opportunities with real life demands. And so for me, that's another piece where we really want to use these in order to get us where we need to be. I was just in a career and tech center on Friday who has 600 seats. They have 600 students, and they're like, Byron, we've got to figure out how to get more. So that's some of the important work that we have to do. So therefore, the other thing that I've done in our state to release these OTL principles are that on October the 8th, we are going to have a session, and Ross is going to be in Indiana for that with our Indiana Association in Career and Technical Education, where we have our own session to talk about the opportunity to learn principles and framework and how those might apply to Indiana. We'll be able to have all the career and tech people there. We're inviting school leaders and everyone else. So hopefully we can really get this rolled out and use these principles and have them embedded in the work that we do in Indiana. With that, Ross, thank you very much for having the opportunity to share a little bit about how we're going to use this in our state. I turn it back to you.
Terrific. Byron, thank you for your engagement and your leadership and for those remarks. And I will go ahead and invite the panelists, I think, to put their cameras back on and come up while I read the first question that we're going to take from the Q&A. And I'm going to read it pretty much verbatim as it was put in the Q&A function. This one was offered by Anonymous. Students' needs are at the forefront of opportunities to learn, but we know that education, instruction, and learning is enabled through educators. Linda Darling-Hammond mentioned investments in workforce, teacher prep, and qualification indicators being developed in California. Are there other ways that teachers and school staff fit into the OTL principles? Linda, you're on mute. I don't know if you want to come off. So I will say, I know that the principles speak in many ways. They speak broadly to educators and to the adults in schools. So speak to the need to have those support personnel and speak also to the importance of school leadership and being intentional about having effective principles. And I will just say one other thing, and then Linda, it looks like you might be ready and I'll turn it to you. One of the things that came up, and it's come up a little bit in the conversation today, but I want to reinforce it, is the really important state role in sort of networking schools and school systems with other support providers, with other folks who are serving children and families, because it cannot fall only on the shoulders of school leaders. So I'm very optimistic about the potential of community schools to help in this, but actually only if we really set up schools to leverage so many of the other resources and capacity that exists for support, as opposed to just continuing to say, students have needs, so schools, it's your job to address them. But on the broader question of how do teachers and school staff fit into opportunity to learn principles, Linda, let me turn to you, and then Amy and Angelica, if you want to come in as well.
Great. Can you hear me? Wait,
Yep.
I've got my phone also.
We can hear you. There's a little bit of an echo, but I think it's okay. Nope.
My internet is unstable, so I've been listening in on my phone.
All right, I can hear you now.
Is there still an echo?
Nope.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to add that in addition to the data we have about what kind of qualifications teachers have in different schools, and we're just beginning to share that out with parents and the public and putting it in the dashboard and so on, and making investments in teacher residency programs and service scholarships for helping people get through preparation, and encouraging mentoring for both principals and teachers. We also have a survey now of graduates of preparation programs, both administrators and teachers, saying what they think they got and what they think they need. And that can drive a whole process of investing in the preparation that candidates get, so that, you know, when they do get to schools, we know that people who are better prepared stay longer. And that really helps us with the stability of the workforce as well as the capacity. So that's another element of the process, is to be sure that we're also iterating around the quality of preparation that they're getting.
Amy?
Good afternoon again. This is Amy Sinclair. Absolutely, when we talk about these opportunities to learn, I think central to all of this is teacher quality and teacher preparation, and at least for Iowa and the time that I've been on the education committee and directing that, there are a few things that we've tried to do that do align with what we're talking about with opportunities to learn and having those highly capable teachers in classrooms. We've only recently begun an apprenticeship program for high school students to become paraeducators, so we get an interest involved early on with people who might potentially become educators and start them on a career path that will get them there earlier. We have what we call our teacher leadership career ladder. which allows for mentoring of highly qualified teachers, for new teachers, so that the more experienced are supporting and assisting the less experienced within their very own classrooms. And I think the third thing that we've done that pulls in some additional subject matter experts where they might not have been in education otherwise. We have alternative licensing that allows for folks who have had careers to go and do an abbreviated licensing process, if you will, if they already have a degree in the experience within a subject matter, so that they can go on and take that subject matter expertise into a classroom, so that kids are actually being able to access subject matter experts who are at the top level, but also are then prepared for the work in the classroom, so that the pedagogy is there as well. Those are a few things that we're doing that fall under this opportunity to learn, because the question is relevant. It's not just saying kids deserve this. It's how do we get the appropriate people in front of them who care about their success and are capable of fulfilling that need.
Yeah, I will also say, back to add on to what Linda said. So one of the things that we plan to do with the principals is work with higher ed. So I'm lucky enough that there's a commissioner of higher education. I have shared these principles with him. We're convening a group with the school presidents, private and public, so that we can talk about what does this mean in teacher preparation? Because we're always having this conversation of we do this when they get to us at the district level, but what happens in their preparation? Because teachers want to feel successful and also want to feel like they're coming into a commitment that they understand that we all have across the board. So this is something that we are going to roll out together, and hopefully Ross will join us once we have a date, but that is the plan with higher ed and supporting our incoming teachers.
Terrific. And, there's a question, and we may come back to this, about what's cross-agency collaboration like, and even not cross-agency, but across the different branches or state leadership offices. So we may come back to that, Angelica. I want to ask, there's sort of two questions on the table. Well, first, just to add one thing on how do the opportunity to learn sort of principles, how do they also sort of, address or relate to adults and employees of the system, right? One thing, we've seen the big public conversation about teacher shortages, and we've seen how hard it's been to actually sort of make that conversation much more focused and specific on where are those shortages, in what subject areas, in what regions. And I think that's a place where actually state leadership could both get much more clear about, again, where specifically are the shortages, and then be in that conversation both with higher education and with alternative providers about how are we addressing the actual needs that we have for more teachers in particular subject areas, in particular regions. But I want to put a new set of questions on the table, and there's sort of two different questions, there are two questions that are related, right? One was a question about sort of what holds states accountable. So if these are state leadership principles, how is it that states are held accountable? And then there was another question that says the framework is focused on state policy, but I'm curious how the working group thinks about the role for federal policy. Are there changes at the federal level that are necessary, even if not sufficient, for states to manifest the principles more fully? In other words, where can the federal government help and or get out of the way? And I think those are interesting questions that are related, but they're not the same. So what truly meaningfully holds state leadership accountable? And what's the role of federal policy, either in that or just in sort of enabling this opportunity to learn agenda more broadly?
I'd love to start us off on that. One of the reasons to have these kinds of indicators, and when California back in 2013 put its 8 state priorities and said we're going to look at indicators of each of these, both at the state level and at the local level, and we've created a process for that to happen. So having those indicators, and then also having them broken down by groups of students on a regular basis, it gives you a basis for state accountability. It gives you a basis for how are we doing, where are we doing well, and it's not just about saying, oh, the test scores are not moving or there's inequality in the test scores. It's also about saying, wait a minute, there's also inequality in the opportunities to learn, and we can address that. We can think about where the investments may need to go. And we do that, in my experience, every year we're looking at where are we and where do we need to go. Now, you have to have the motivation to do that. You have to want to not ignore the data, but having the data is really, really important to drive a continuous improvement mentality and a continuous improvement investment strategy. And nobody wants to waste money, right? And that's always a question in education. It's not just having more money, it's spending it in the right ways. It's addressing the needs where they exist, as you were saying, with the shortages. And I think the federal government could be helpful in a few ways. One is they've already said, we encourage you to do more here, and we are ready to approve state plans that evolve their systems of continuous improvement. The next reauthorization might be more even focused on continuous improvement strategies that can be encouraged and perhaps incentivized, and look to states not only to improve student test-based achievement, but other outcomes like the college and career readiness and the presentation, the demonstration of work on equitable opportunities to learn. So I think that this is a really important piece of taking those steps.
Yeah, so I'll add to that like Linda, and we also have metrics, right? But we are also measuring not just what the federal government asks of us. So we are measuring school culture and environment. That's part of our metrics. Also, CTE, what are the different pathways? How are we making sure that there's access? So we actually last year did something called the Opportunity to Learn data analysis of our high schools, and where do we have opportunities and where do our students do not, and what does our diploma actually mean? So we have now started revamping our regulations for secondary education to ensure that we have alignment and that we're all rowing in the same direction. So how do we hold states accountable? And if we're talking about the OTL principles in particular, it should be present in our policy. So our policy should reflect the things that we believe that are important, not just the things that federal accountability asks us to do, but what are the other measures that are present in our principles that we know are of value, and measure those as well. So how can the federal government help us? Also looking at those things, at those different measures, and not just looking at the test scores, but all the variety of things that we're looking to do as we continuously improve as a system.
I would only add that this does become a little difficult. This is one of those ideological questions, right? It comes back to where you see yourself as a state versus a federal system, and how that all interacts together. And by and large, I often tend toward, I wish the feds would get out of the way and let states be innovative. I mean, just as and by the same token, outside of setting up that framework for an opportunity, I also think the states need to get out of the way and let local education agencies, our local districts, be innovative in their processes as well. So I think that how we're held accountable then within that framework, within that way of viewing how we do education, I think the proof then is, I mean, to use a great little Midwest term, the proof's in the pudding. You know, our kids coming out of school, are they civically engaged? Are they safe and happy and healthy and fulfilled in their own abilities? And are they prepared to be contributing members of society? And there are ways to measure that along the way, as both of my previous panelists have said. There are ways of measuring that along the way, but I think we're only able to be innovative when we work under a framework that all kids deserve the opportunity in a way that makes sense where they are. I will tell you, opportunities in Iowa, and we can talk geography, but opportunities in Iowa look a whole lot different than opportunities in Rhode Island or California. They just do, by virtue of geography. We have kids spread out, 50 miles from each other going to the same school district. Time is a factor. resources are a factor, but the opportunity, that overarching opportunity, is what we have to look at, and the long-term outcome of what those opportunities ought to create.
I would just like to plus one with Amy on one of her key points, which is that, the states have the constitutional responsibility for education, need to create a coherent system that works within that context. And there are places where it would be helpful for the federal government to be less prescriptive, such that we can do the best work within our context. So I think that we have to really think about what's the right balance in the federal state relationship. I will say that in the principle that talks about students having the right to do work that is worth doing, that assessments have a lot to do with that, and we could use much more opportunity to be inventive in the way in which we do assessments than we currently have. So there is a very careful tightrope that is important in the federal state balance.
Okay, so we only have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to put one more question on the table. And so that last question was sort of about intergovernmental relations, right? How does this concept relate to federal state relations? Here's another question. How frequent is it within a state to have the state board president, the commissioner of education, the leaders of the relevant state education committees, and I would add the governor's office as well, in sustained direct collaboration? How can opportunities to learn facilitate that kind of coordination? So I'd love for any of you to take up how you see that happening in the healthiest ways now, and how you might see the opportunities to learn as a framework helping with that kind of coordination going forward.
It's different from state to state because we have such very different governance structures. We do have the opportunity to have that conversation happening in California, but it's very different from state to state how governance structures are created.
Yeah. So I will say that in Rhode Island, I'm lucky enough to sit on the governor's cabinet with all the heads of state agencies. So it provides an opportunity for us to really look at, what are we working towards? Like, how are we all held accountable and responsible? And that's a different way of working than I've experienced in the past. So it's everybody's responsibility at the table. We don't get it right all the time, and we're moving in a much better direction. COVID taught us actually how to mobilize very quickly and work interagency in a way that we had never worked before. Tearing down those bureaucratic barriers that we have created ourselves. So during the pandemic, we took out a lot of these rules that we had put in place that only serve to as barriers. So we have done that. And then looking at how do we actually create community schools? I can't do that without my colleagues at the table. That is not something that the education department can take on its own. It is a shared responsibility. So I feel lucky to be in that place. And one of our major goals is to share these principles and commit to them throughout the governor's cabinet.
Excellent.
And I would also just wrap up Iowa. I have access to my director of my Department of Education. I have access to my state board of education. I have access to my board of regents, which I think we've also failed to pull into this conversation. And I have direct access to my governor's office. And we do sit down and have these conversations. I think the bigger question then that maybe we've missed out from a policy making standpoint is the idea of including those we serve, which are the parents and kids, the families that we actually serve. I think that's where this breaks down more than anything, is that we're not pulling that piece of this much larger puzzle together within the scope of what we're talking about within education. Those are our customers, and if they're not at the table having that conversation, we're doing it wrong.
Well, and Amy, I really appreciate you bringing that into this conversation, as you brought it into many of the conversations of the Opportunity to Learn Working Group over these months. And so let me just, and one of the things we talked about, right, is this Opportunity to Learn frame really can be a frame for sponsoring important public conversations and engaging families and community leaders about their aspirations and how those get manifested in schools. So let me close us out and just reflect on the fact that public education plays really essential roles in American society. It is a bedrock of community. It is a bulwark of democracy, and it is an engine of upward mobility. And Americans broadly agree on this opportunity equation. We need for public education policy to catch up to those opportunity aspirations, And so I want to close us out by just saying thank you. Thank you to these incredible leaders who have been with us today and through this working group, and their colleagues who joined the working group. They put these principles over the current politics of education. I'm humbled by their leadership. I'm honored by their partnership. I'm super hopeful about what these opportunity to learn principles can do. So please stay connected, stay in touch, reach out if you want to think about how to put these opportunity to learn principles to work in your leadership. And thank you for joining us today. Have a good rest of your day.